I'm Lucas Ihlein and I'm an artist, and in the last 10 years I've worked on a lot of projects to do with agriculture and farming. My real interest in this area began in a project with Ian Millis called the Yeomans project, which focused on the work of P.A. Yeomans, the father of Allan Yeomans and the inventor of the keyline system of sustainable farming. When I found out that Allan was continuing, in his 80s, continuing to invent new devices for encouraging sustainable agricultural practices in Australia, I thought this is a fantastic opportunity to create a discussion around Australian innovation and what role farming can play in mitigating the effects of climate change.
My name is Allan Yeomans and I run an agricultural business. After years of this, I actually learned an awful lot about soil. So we're in the business of actually making implements that develop soil. I was invited to a sort of think tank in the US, top people in their sustainable agricultural fields, and there were 20 of us. And my presentation was, they were talking about sustainable agriculture. My concern then was global warming, and it was 1990 that this conference was held, and I'd been thinking about global warming. So I wrote a paper where knowing about keyline, knowing about soil development, I knew that it was possible that we could take it out of the air and use soil to do it. So I knew the basis of it, and I put the two of them together, what I knew about soil, what I knew about meteorology, and that was the start of soil carbon sequestration. So all we want to do is measure how much increase there has been, and that will be all organic carbon in the form of humus and dead material in the plants.
The Yeomans Carbon Still is deceptively simple. You take a large sample of soil, you put it into the machine, you weigh it, you heat it to over 500 degrees, and that's the temperature that the carbon burns off at. You then cool it down again, weigh the sample, and the difference in weight between before and after is the amount of carbon that was in the soil.
The reality is that the normal tests now are all done in laboratories with equipment that the cheapest, like $120,000, and this thing's $5,000, $10,000 for the same sort of stuff. And they only test tiny little samples, and you wouldn't believe it. I mean, if I was handing out money, I wouldn't hand it out to a farmer on the strength of half a teaspoon of his soil, but this tests a couple of kilos, and it's a very cheap machine, and the samples are easy to collect.
At the moment in this country, we don't have a system which is easily accessible for farmers to be paid for sequestering carbon dioxide into their soils. So part of our project is to help begin a discussion about how that might be possible.
So Carbon Farmers of Australia assists farmers through designated methods to be able to store carbon in trees. So every leaf on a tree and every leaf on a grass is a solar panel, and that solar panel is sucking carbon dioxide out of the air. It stores the carbon in its structures, and it also takes it back down into the soil where it is safely stored, and at the same time we're reducing the carbon load in the air. And we've coined the word carbon farming so that people can understand that we're not only farming, but that carbon is now the product that these farmers are farming. One of the best known activities for carbon farming is improved grazing management. So often people have said, those cattle are bad for the country. Look at what they're doing. They're making it bare. Well, it's not the cattle, it's the way we're farming them. And when you change your farm management so that the cattle are actually grazing productive grasses in a productive state, you can actually improve your landscape, and at the same time, you're putting carbon back into the soil.
My role as an artist is to make connections where they might not already exist. So I'm interested in taking Allan Yeomans, getting him to meet Robert Quirk, who was the winner of the Australian Carbon Farmer of the Year, sugarcane farmer, getting him to meet Russell Logan, who's an Indigenous land manager, bringing these things together so that they become in dialogue with each other around the problem of carbon in the atmosphere and how to draw it down using soil as a sink for carbon.
I'm Robert Quirk. I'm a cane grower on the Tweed and have been doing this for the last 50 years. A little bit of innovation in the last 20, which have made my property really sustainable, cheaper cost of production and higher production. I do a few things. One is I cut without burning, so harvest without burning, retain all the residue. Immediately after harvest, spray with 5 kilograms of urea on the residue, and that's creating a fungi rather than it breaking down and going back into the atmosphere as CO2. Not only do we retain the residue, but we're growing lupins and soybeans as a cover crop for the nitrogen. Then we don't have to use hardly any fertiliser, and that has been phenomenal.
I made an effort to sort of get myself, educated around, I guess, the carbon. And carbon is everywhere. It's something that for 60,000 years in this country, our people have farmed this land. And I was really excited that the benefit of what Allan brings to the table is the opportunity to get that quick measurement and to basically have the ability to do that on site. That's going to be a great sell for the projects that we do currently for our private landowners and also for Indigenous landowners.
Part of the project is by taking an object that's been invented by someone who wouldn't describe themselves as an artist and placing it in the art gallery, we are trying to reframe how we consider art to be. Art is a form of innovation which helps to create cultural change, and I feel like that's exactly what Allan is doing with the Yeomans Carbon Still.
There is already too much carbon dioxide, too much of this stuff is in the air. That alters the optical characteristics of the atmosphere. So it doesn't matter if we stop putting stuff in now. Those characteristics have been altered and they're going to stay like that unless we remove it. And the only way we can do it, and with any sort of reasonable cost, is by taking the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and have farmers, by the ordinary process of farming, convert it into the humus in soil. That means effectively we can recruit every farmer in the world, and there's 1 trillion tonnes of this excess stuff, and we can't leave it there. Even if we stop adding to it, it's already too much. So if we pay our farmers to increase that level of fertility in the soil, which is just basically turning carbon dioxide, which is carbon, into humus in the soil, which is a plant farming process, we will solve that problem.